This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about the importance of attractiveness.
Woo!
I feel pretty, so pretty. This is what a Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and debutante, Jess Vander, sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess.
Are debutante balls real? I mean, I guess I know they're real,
Yeah.
but like, it's so foreign to my culture. Like, I think about them as like an imaginary concept, even though I think they are a real thing.
Yeah.
It's just,
Is it like it's the narwhal phenomenon?
yeah,
Where
yeah,
people
where
are
some
like,
people think
narwhals are imaginary. They're like,
creatures.
unicorns are imaginary, so narwhals have to also be imaginary in that. So yeah, so debutante balls and narwhals are both real.
Now you know. Jess, can we talk about something?
Wow, good thing I'm here for that.
Attractiveness. Is it real?
Whoa.
Is it subjective? What is the science? I bumped into a study online recently. I wasn't perusing evolutionary behavioral sciences, but I ran into a study that was published in it. Yeah.
Right.
The study was called Physical and Psychosocial Correlates of Facial Attractiveness by Marco Costa and Dario Maestropieri, maybe Italian
Nice.
researchers. And initially I came across it because there's some really interesting graphs in it that weren't sort of like the central conceit, but it was demonstrating that women see themselves as basically just like a hair more attractive in self-reports than everyone else who is reporting on their faces sees them. So just like a nudge, right? Like everyone, we all know, like, you probably think you're a little bit smarter than you are. You probably think you're a little bit more attractive than you are. Great. Women came in this study, self-identifying women, as just a hair more attractive than other people saw them, but pretty close. Men saw themselves as being twice as attractive as others reported on their attractiveness, which is just like initially sort of like a funny finding, right? Like there's a bunch of men going around that are like, I'm a 10, and everyone else is like, you're a 5.
No.
Yeah. And so like I bumped into the study, just like someone had pulled out those graphs and spoke about them. But then looking into the study a little bit more, it is interesting because there are, whether through self-reported or other rated attractiveness, if you attractiveness is then positively correlated with self-reported social status, self-esteem, and other traits, while it is negatively correlated with anxiety, neuroticism, past negative time perspective. And what's interesting about this is men are just walking around like delusional and like feel better about themselves. And we've had a lot of these conversations recently about sort of the impact that social media is having on particularly young women's mental health, attractiveness comparison, all of these different things. But we also know through many studies, I remember OkCupid put out a big study at some point that like you may be like aggregate 3 of 5 on attractiveness, but if there's high variance, like if someone thinks you're a 5, like your outcomes are like better relationships, better whatever. Like attractiveness is so subjective, but in this instance, just like feeling like you're attractive makes like your life better. And so I wanted to ask you, how important is attractiveness?
Wow. It's very interesting. It's also interesting to think about attractiveness not as even just an objective measure, but sort of a mental state, or sort of a something that you can feel versus something that someone else can assess, and that those two things are different but related. Like,
Yeah.
the known concept that confidence itself is attractive is really interesting, especially if there are all of these overconfident men who are like, yeah, totally, and that it's meaningfully helping, that even if it is misguided or objectively wrong, it does help, which is really interesting. I also, I have to acknowledge that, like, the way even that we're thinking about this is so, it probably fragments and splinters so much when you look beyond the much more studied sort of gender binary constructs of this,
Mhm.
and you look in other spaces and different ways that people assess it, especially, and also looking over time about what is attractive. We've talked before on the show about, like,
Mhm.
different eyebrows being attractive in different eras, or different body features that are fetishized over historical periods. We're in our butt phase right now. People just are into that, and it's everywhere. But that was not always the case. Remember the origin of Pilates? That was, like, designed to make things smaller, and it's just so interesting to see how so much of that is both something that you can measure and that is generally agreed upon, but also so subjective.
Yeah. It's so subjective, and it's what um it's interesting too, right? Like, this study was about, like, specifically facial attractiveness, right? Like, confine and constrain what exactly you're trying to study. And so it was narrowed down to, like, images of people's faces. You say how attractive you think your face is, and then a bunch of other, 231 other people rate your face. Um, the part that it is, like, challenging here is, I think we place a lot of emphasis on it, and the point you made earlier about how do you feel mattering more, like, most of the time I'm not I'm not thinking about how I look, or whether I am attractive. Not that's not like, I am, like, blissfully ignorant to, like, appearance or nothing like that. It's just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how much I can change this conversation, so I just don't think about it. And the point about you know, how do people weight attractiveness in, like, partner identification and, like, like, romantic partner finding, is really interesting, because there are lots of, like, evolutionary biology studies that talk about, what are the evaluation criteria for men and women, right? And, like, even in this, men sort of identifying themselves as twice as attractive as everyone else in the study reported them to be, might be, like, they're not focused on their face as, like, the source or origin of their attractiveness, in some capacity, and maybe women uh, are more focused on that based on, like, how historically and evolutionary, like, partner identification has worked. But it makes me think about, you had mentioned something before the show started about, like, dating profiles and online dating, right? Where there's a lot of um, data that has come out, particularly about men and women's success on online dating, right? Where it is largely focused on, like, facial attractiveness because of or maybe people are taking, like, photos of their entire body or whatever, but it is still like static image attractiveness, and a narrow band of men are inordinately successful on dating apps, and all the other men are just, failing.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about this, because this is one of my favorite fun facts, and it's so interesting, especially if you are one of those people like me who happen to have a bunch of people in their life still or very actively on the apps looking for love or whatever. And it's that, so in sort of the high level, trends research about women and men and how they use dating apps and how attractiveness plays a role. Men factor in attractiveness very prominently. It's like one of the main decision makers of whether a guy will swipe, and studies have shown men just swipe so much more, just like very generous with swipes. Also, there are more men on dating apps in general, and they tend to optimize for attractiveness. What's really interesting, though, and there were research done by OkCupid, backed up by Oxford studies, that basically said two incredible things. One, that women were generally far less charitable about men's attractiveness baseline. They rated men mostly 1s and 2s out of 5. And at the same time, the second fact is that women messaged more average-looking men and were much less likely to message the most attractive-looking men. And part of this is that there is sort of like either an unattainability element. Also, some suggestions say that it's because women don't want to date someone who they think is more attractive than them, whereas men are absolutely trying to find someone and are not abashed about trying to date someone more attractive than them. And the way this balances out is so fascinating, because, there are... I saw in a Pew study, men complain that they don't receive enough messages, and like people aren't reaching out to them. They're like, I just don't get it. Like, what's the problem here? And it's like, I don't know, but maybe there are just these other factors that have nothing to do with how attractive you are that maybe are falling by the wayside, and that you're not doing your task to draw people in. So just isn't that so fascinating?
Yeah, it's like totally game theory, right? And also like historical motivations, right? Like those sort of, right, we're trying to do dating or partner identification or mate identification, whatever, like however we want to talk about it from like a historical perspective in a contemporary modern setting, where the reality is like the decision criteria have changed, but the evolutionary criteria, your sort of ingrained wiring hasn't changed in 150 years of industrial revolution, or like the 25 years of the internet revolution. And so you're right, like if you're trying to date someone and you are from a 1 to 5, you are a woman that is a 5, and you're only messaging like 2s because you want to like hold down a relationship and lock in a partner, because you've like created an uneven incentive structure that you are more attractive than your partner, therefore you are more likely theoretically to like keep them, is super fascinating. It's like so it just makes me think about like, are there just like a bunch of, in this like 1 to 5 scale, like just a bunch of lonely 5s on both sides of the like, just like no one's stuck. I'm too pretty to find someone.
Where's the apps?
I'm too handsome. Yeah.
Yeah. Where's the apps for the hotties? the hotties, lonely hotties out there.
Well, there are also like studies related to this, right? Like because of the historical sort of gender preferences within mate identification, like there are weird correlates that come out of it. Like more attractive couples are more likely to have female children. like I remember reading that in like a journal like this, like maybe in like 2012, and I was like, what? Like, right? Like these people are attractive, and somehow they're like the best investment in procreation somehow nets out to where like we're pretty, so prettiness is more valuable in female children, so like somehow female children are coming out in like the math. I'm like, what? How does that work out? Like, what is the driver behind that?
Correlation, or is it causal? That's very interesting. Wow. I feel like that the different stemming sort of behaviors, decisions, consequences of this are so fascinating. And on the subject of dating apps, since we're talking about it, I think it's really interesting being armed with all of this information when trying to create profiles. And I was saying earlier before we hopped on about how it feels like a microcosm of brand strategy in this very sort of down to earth and universal experience that is the dating app universe, where people without this knowledge might over optimize on the wrong traits, maybe because they have biases and they don't realize the way that it actually works. And so, guys posting photos of themselves looking too good when that is actually maybe less appealing or not, or maybe gonna put them on that lonely hotties only app. As well as like it's under investing in their profiles, which is where women spent much more time than men reading, maybe to no one's surprise.
Well, it's interesting to like try and quantify these things too, right? Like even within that, like that what you're talking about of like overemphasizing, like is someone like mentally modeling like, oh, I look like a whatever, I look like an 8 in this picture versus something else.
Right.
But that I'm realizing like historically, I can actually see moments of, so Tina, who like shares studio space with us and had shared studio space with us forever, was moving recently. She's a designer at a company called Little Fury, and we've been friends now for like 13 years or something. And we were talking when she was moving, just like reminiscing. And there's a point where the last time I was single, like in 2012 or something, where we were talking, she was single, people we were dating and talking about that. And she just like came out to me and was like, oh, like you're a super solid 7. And I was like, I don't want to know. Like truly, like I don't want to know. Like I don't want to think about it that way. Like I feel comfortable in wherever I'm sitting. Like I don't want to hear you put like a number to it. And it makes me think of like, was I doing this thing? Right? Like I felt confident wherever it was that I was sitting. Not that like I'm a babe or something. It just like I was good. I felt good. And then she like put a number on it, and I was like, shut it down.
This reminds me of this in my mind, in the catalog of one's like mental library of articles that you for some reason remember. There's this one article a bunch of years ago, looking at it was in January 2016, about somebody who went into the Tinder rating system and learned what their ELO score was, which is basically their algorithmic ranking of basically hotness. And
ELO score is like a chess rating score. You're taking like a chess score to your face, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. And that's what they call it internally. And they use that construct of to basically power pair people, which is where like they want you to be seeing people that are on a relatively equivalent ELO score or ranking, so to speak, so that you have a greater chance of success. And that's why the more you swipe, that's why you'll notice when you're on dating apps, they want you to swipe more because it gives more data to feed what your score is. And so, but it's so interesting. It's one of those really awesome long reads. And in sort of this sort of journalists or writers' exploration, they are like grappling with the consequence of seeing under that hood and being like, oh, maybe I don't actually want to know this information. It cuts a little deep.
No way. I would not. I'm definitely like the person who's like, someone's like, if you could find out the day that you died, would you want to know? I'm like, nope. Like, blissful ignorance, please. Like, I don't, if we're not dating, I don't want to know how attractive you think I am or not. Like, I'm really happy, like, just not thinking about, like, there is that idea of where do you choose to focus your attention, and that, like, how important is attractiveness in that initial question, I think, is obviously, like, there's not an answer to it. It's probably contextual, but, like, what is the currency that you place on that thing for yourself? Like, where does it rank in your personal identification attributes? And, like, for me, that's never been high, and I don't want to think about it because I don't want to, like, elevate the amount of time, I think that probably just means that I'm like, I don't feel like that is a particularly strong skill that I have, and therefore I don't want to spend time thinking about the things that I'm not like good at. Like, I feel like an intelligent person. I would rather like spend my time if I'm reflecting on myself and my personal merits and attributes, being like, I'm pretty good at that, but like where do you put that in your like personal power ranking of your skill sets probably matters. And I think to that question of like, why are young women having this challenging moment from sort of a mental well-being perspective, like a lot of it comes back to this like comparative dynamic, which puts you into these things, and that you're almost putting, even if you're not expressly quantifying it, you're sort of like putting yourself on that like graduated scale somewhere and perpetually being like, she's more attractive than me, she's less attractive, and you're like, oh, I'm like adjusting my rankings constantly as like every picture I'm seeing on an app, and it just sucks. So like, how important is attractiveness? Probably important in a bunch of contexts, but like, how good is it for us to think about? Probably not very.
Yeah, and besides just that sort of like that toxic process of comparison, there's also just like harassment, and younger women are much more likely to be harassed on dating apps or sent like explicit messages. I saw something that said
on non-dating apps also.
Right, and just like in the world, 60% of female users aged 18 to 34 say somebody on a dating site or app continued to contact them after they said they were not interested. There's just, there's just sort of other things that maybe we need to work on about that.
So are we just burning the apps down?
No, and that's not really, I don't think the intention anyway. It's just to say that
we're just disposing of the whole man.
Yeah, well, and our relationship with attractiveness is so fraught as a signal of anything, and yet a very, very real source and measurement of value and worth and stuff. That's just like we're figuring that out right now. So not that it's all bad things, but it is fraught.
It is fraught. Well, Jess, do you want to take us to what corner is mirror corner? I don't want to look.
Wow. A mirror corner?
What is the wrap-up corner?
Mirrors that goes on and on and on and on. How important is attractiveness? Lots, but also not, but also kind of. But also, you know what I'm saying? I think that's it.
Yeah, but like first of all, but like also second of all,
Exactly. Yeah. So, send us your hilarious dating app stories. Send us your hopeful, inspiring attractiveness, self-valuing, and self-worth moments.
Can I add a note to the wrap up that is like, this may be like the one area where like being delusional is probably good for all of us.
Genuinely does help you. So you live in that world.
We're all 10s.
But like
we're all just
don't
10s.
but like don't take that to messed up places. Just like contain it and feel proud and happy. Okay, that seems helpful.
Yep. Great.
For yourself. Just keep it to yourself.
You're a 10. Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain Produzione. That's Italian because of researchers.
Brought to you by Lonely Hotties IO. A place for all you lonely hotties.
That got me. As always, we'd like to thank executive producer and hottie matchmaker, Jess Vander.
Well, thanks, Joey. We'd also like to thank sound engineer and the optimal being, Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank programming coordinator and ice cream hottie, Les Jacobs.
And thank you to our production help and 10 out of 10 out of 10, Sarah Gilbert and Norm Estridge.
10, 10, 10, 10. As always.
10s across the board.
Thank you, Elen.
Sorry.
Special thanks to, I guess, successful use of dating apps. I mean, you found love in a hopeless place, Jess Vander.
That's true. I also I made a Hinge card game for couples. It's like what's the couple newlywed game? It's like the couples game, but it's based on Hinge prompts. And like one of these days, Hinge is gonna come knocking and be like, "Yes, I want to buy that card game." But until then, that's just like a thing for me alone. So, thanks for nothing, Hinge.
Yeah. How much does a polar bear weigh? How much does a polar bear weigh? Enough to break the ice. Hi, I'm Joey.
I'd like to special unthanks that joke.
Well, happy weekend. I hope you all feel beautiful and find love if that's what you're looking for.
You're
Merry
all
Christmas.
hotties inside and out. Love you. Thank you. Bye.
Love you. Bye. Three, two, one. I feel pretty, so pretty.